It is a next frontier of health science and medical intervention, and is grounded in some of the hardest kinds of science to do. It's only simple in how it's prescribed. I initially encountered enormous skepticism. Who's this long-haired Berkeley guy? But now they are recognizing mind-body relationships are fundamental to life expectancy and disease.
Fantastic. Well, and it's Dacher Keltner, I pronounced the name correctly. And the book, Awe, A-W-E, so the subtitle, The Transformative Power of Everyday Wonder. I have to say, I really like the book.
Oh, thank you. Thank you.
And it's even brought me like talking points with my children. Like we have, it's not often work can translate into chats with little kids, but things like the discussion of oxytocin. So like we have a beloved dog, and everyone knows it's a warming thing to kind of look in a dog's eyes. But this idea that both you and the dog are getting a release of oxytocin, it just adds that extra knowledge to it.
It's amazing. Everybody should know about oxytocin.
They really should, and I talk to them straight away, and that's really what I like about the book, because everyone, I think, kind of knows on some level that seeing things of wonder, experiencing things of wonder is good for you. But this book is actually sort of giving it scientific weight and saying not only is it a nice thing, it's actually got potential for, well, not just enhancing your life, but lengthening your life and making you overall more healthy. So perhaps one of the surprising things, though, is I think when we think of awe and wonder, we think of nice things.
Yeah.
But maybe we could start with one of the things that struck me in the book is it's not all about nice stuff.
No, not at all. I mean, I learned that, working with prisoners and that they feel awe in prison, contemplating the difficulties of life in prison and the injustices that they face. I learned that, talking to artist Rosalind Fisher, who, really sort of reflected on the basis of her disease and found awe in thinking about that. And I learned it, in my own trauma of losing my brother too early to colon cancer, and just in the grief that followed his loss, just trying to figure out the mysteries of life, and fueled by awe. Like, what is a human life? What is my brother? How does he stay with me? Awe is really interesting in that it spurs us to feel energized and to wonder about things, but often in facing trauma.
I guess when you're talking about difficult things, how long since you lost your brother?
4 years.
4 years. I'm really sorry about that. You talk very movingly about it in the book. And because all you've talked about for a long time, right? Because I've seen you've done lectures going back a few years, but the book's brand new. So was the loss of your brother, was that the kind of spur to take this to the next level?
Very much so. I mean, when he died, I literally was in grief for 3 months, and then got a bunch of books that matter a lot to me and just started writing, about grief and awe and, our lives, our brotherhood, and it led me to the book.
What are the kind of first studies that made you think that we can actually, put some meat on the bones and make this a real thing? What were the first kind of studies you?
Yeah, there was one, it was interesting. It was from 2006 or 2007, and we'd been struggling to make people feel awe in the laboratory for very sensible reasons. And then, we took participants and we had them stand by this replica of a T-Rex. And it's awe-inspiring. It's giant and it's dramatic, and it's, it's got all the power of a dinosaur skeleton. And people felt awe, and we documented that brief experience of awe, outside of the lab near this T-Rex skeleton, transformed their sense of self, right? They suddenly felt more collective and communal compared to a Western individualistic self. And that taught us, like, get outside, get people in nature, get people at Yosemite, listening to music, rely on the world's sources of awe.
So how did they react differently? So you're saying you're asking them questions when they're in the presence of this great big thing, and then you're asking them questions when they're just in more normal environment? Is that?
Yeah, well, this was, classic control condition, which is they just write, who are you? I am, and fill in a sentence stem, and they just got define who they are. Our control condition is they're standing in the same place, and instead of looking into the replica of the T-Rex skeleton, they're turned in the opposite direction, looking down a hallway, right? So it's the same physical place, but doesn't have all.
Doesn't have all. Okay. Amazing. Another thing that stood out is there's a lot of talk about inflammation
Yeah,
in the health and wellness sphere. Yeah. It's a huge factor in pretty much
everything.
illness.
Yeah.
And the question, I suppose, is how do you tackle it? And there are various medical ways of tackling it, most of which have other consequences, because inflammation's there for a reason, and you start taking drugs to fight inflammation, there are potential effects from those. But you were saying there are studies where if I remember this correctly, the ore itself has anti-inflammatory properties. Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, that was another really big finding, and thank you for flagging that. We have measures, we can pinpoint how regularly you experience awe with pretty well constructed scales. We related it to blood draws of inflammation, interleukin 6, I think it was. And it was awe that led to or was associated with lower levels of inflammation. And then you link that to a lot of the nature immersion literature that people like Ming Kuo are writing about, where nature immersion reduces inflammation. And so and in a more recent paper, we're making the case that awe through nature, through music, through meditation, through spirituality reduces inflammation as one of the central explanations of why awe benefits our health. So it was a really astonishing finding to us.
How have you had much reaction from the medical community about that?
Yeah, it's incredible. I speak to thousands of medical doctors a year. It's one of my most important contexts for speaking. And sorry about this.
The tech is trying to test our patience today, but
it's just undoing us here.
We're on our way through it.
Yeah, when the medical community hears that finding, they perk up and they're like, I'll listen to this guy talk about awe. And now, out here, for example, in California, medical doctors are prescribing nature. And I think in the next 5 to 10 years, it will be to prescribe music or an awe walk, right? Something that brings you awe. So yeah, they are definitely paying attention to that finding.
Because it could sound. I was wondering if you'd had any kind of digging in of the heels, because it's sort of what people used to say years ago. Rather than have a medical intervention, why don't you get outside more? Why don't you walk more, get into nature? And it kind of seems obvious. And I think the medical profession is all about doing something clever, isn't it? Whereas this is just something anyone can pick up.
Yeah, but the medical world is humbly recognizing, that mind-body relationships are fundamental to life expectancy and disease. And our Surgeon General, Vivek Murthy, the highest medical officer in the country, his legacy is about social connection, but grounded in an understanding of, if I feel connected to the world, I'm physically healthier. And we understand a lot about the neurophysiological pathways of cortisol and vagal tone and inflammation, what I write about in the book. And so, yeah, I initially encountered enormous skepticism, and they'd laugh at me. Not laugh, but just like, who's this long-haired Berkeley guy? But now, they are recognizing that the mind matters, and awe is one of the central determinants of robust physical health. Yeah, but the medical world is humbly recognizing, that mind-body relationships are fundamental to life expectancy and disease. And our Surgeon General, Vivek Murthy, the highest medical officer in the country, his legacy is about social connection, but grounded in an understanding of, if I feel connected to the world, I'm physically healthier. And we understand a lot about the neurophysiological pathways of cortisol and vagal tone and inflammation, what I write about in the book. And so, yeah, I initially encountered enormous skepticism, and they'd laugh at me, not laugh, but just like, who's this long-haired Berkeley guy? But now, they are recognizing that the mind matters, and awe is one of the central determinants of robust physical health.
It's good that they are recognizing that. There was a
Yeah.
there was a piece on the BBC radio earlier, and they were talking about mindfulness walks. There's this lady on, they're talking about you going out, similar, I guess, to the awe walks you talk about, which is going out in nature and finding things to be inspired by. Because it's a big difference if you go out for a walk and you're in your phone or you're listening to something, whatever, and you don't look around. So she was encouraging people to get out and do this, but the way it was treated was like, here's all the seriousness, and here's something fun and quirky that doesn't.
I know.
You do get this kind of, I don't know, this kind of, maybe it's a sort of scorn of anything that seems too simple.
Well, it's not. There is scorn, but it's not simple at all. It's very complicated to understand how the mind influences your kidneys or your liver or your stomach, the condition of your stomach. But we're 50 years of research, 60 years of research on stress, 20 years of research on positive emotions and mindfulness, 10 years of research on awe and nature immersion. It is turning into, I think, one of the next frontiers it is a next frontier of health science and medical intervention. And, it is grounded in some of the hardest kinds of science to do, which is to measure the mind and to do the statistics and to figure out the systems that are affected. But I think it's only simple in how it's prescribed, right? In that you don't need to go through drug approval or, that kind of process. You can just tell people to get outside or dance or hug somebody or have more conversations with people you care about. And that's what I think irks the medical field is the simplicity of the prescription.
Yeah, I suppose you can have the data, but actually what you do about it is pretty simple because it's something that anyone can choose to do. I also really like this idea that you talked about in the book and also in other interviews about karma, because I think you talk about karma, and again, karma is one of these things that I guess we think it's a decent way to live your life because if everyone did it, it would help us out. But again, you're talking about it as though you're talking about it in terms of actually what it does to you. So if you behave in this karmic fashion, it's not just that you're making the world possibly a slightly better place, but it actually has tangible health benefits for the person doing it. Have I listened to that correctly?
Yeah, no. I mean, we awe, as well as other moral sentiments, if you will, like compassion, tend to make us more charitable and kind and cooperative, and you share more. Those are all findings I talk about in the book, that what William James called saintly tendencies. And it's naive to think that that's the end of the process, but our actions go out into social networks, right? And if I'm kind to you, you then, studies show, will be kind to other people. They'll think more highly of me or direct kindness toward me. So yeah, I think that, whether you call it karma or how our kindness spreads through social networks, as social network scientists like to call it, and the kindness is contagious. It's very real, and it's why it's part of the story of why awe benefits people health-wise, is that it indirectly builds out stronger communities. So it's a very important scientific translation of an old idea.
Yeah, because I think the first thing I thought of when I heard the idea was, great scenes in nature or great pieces of music. These might be the most things that come most readily to mind for people. But you're talking also about the kindness of others is a big one. That's one of the sources. You can be really moved by, you see someone help someone when they really didn't need to, or they could have walked on by, and this this gives you this feeling of awe and
Yeah.
all the tangible benefits that go with it.
It that was one of the most astonishing discoveries, and I love your description, Richard. The everyday kindness and courage and overcoming and strength of other people was the most universal source of all. And it wasn't nature or spirituality or great music. It was just people around us sharing and speaking truth to power and overcoming hardship. The medical doctors that I teach, during the pandemic, thousands of them, one of the most consistent stories they tell is, they'll give a hard diagnosis to somebody, about their life may be ending, and those people often respond with gratitude and a sense of, reverence or kindness. So they're morally inspired by these people's strength. And that's what we found in our research. And, in the conversations around this, what you realize with the idea of moral beauty producing awe is we just have to open our eyes and look around us, look at the kindness that's holding societies together, how courageous people are, and remind ourselves of that source of awe.
So I suppose it's really, you want to look at things and take them in, whether they're good or bad.
Yeah.
Because there's another bit that stood out to me. There was a quote from a spiritual leader, Roshi Joan, I think it
Yeah.
was, and
Yeah.
she talked, and you were talking about how when other people suffer,
Yeah.
it forces people to turn away, and we might feel a bit judgy about that and think if you're turning away from suffering, it's that you don't care. Whereas in reality, it's more that people can't cope with the pain of other people. And the quote from her, I wrote it down. She said, I think it was, if you breathe in another person's suffering and breathe it out, transformed. It's this idea that if you're strong enough to look at them while they're suffering, both for you and for them, it can, have this healing effect.
She developed that thinking out of her contemplative practice in Buddhism, but also decades of work in hospice care. Was a leading developer of hospice care for people with AIDS, I think. And, that practice of encountering suffering like I did when my brother died. It was 2 years of horrific suffering. Colon cancer is no joke. In the realm of health and well-being, a lot of, encountering suffering is just a universal. It's going to happen to you. It's going to happen to people you love. It is, as the Buddhists say, it's the first noble truth that you're going to face that. And I did that full force when my brother got colon cancer, and it for the first year, I really struggled, and then I really immersed myself in that philosophy of, rather than turning away or trying to fix it, you you gain awareness of it, you breathe it in, and you let it go. And also, I would say, Richard, like, awe helped me here, which is just to think about, when I was looking at my brother, like, just to contextualize his suffering in terms of the bigger life that he had had, how much love he had experienced, how this is part of the life cycle of, we are born and we grow and then we decay and die. And all of those are ways to situate a life where somebody is suffering in a broader meaning system. And that, along with Roshi Joan Halifax's thinking about breathing it in and letting it go, transformed everything for me.
So
Very useful when we encounter suffering of other people.
So you breathe it in and let it go.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think people are kind of afraid, maybe. Obviously, if it's someone you're very close to, you're there in it regardless. But I think people are maybe a bit afraid to go there with the suffering of others.
It's horrifying, and it's horrifying and terrifying to think about dying. It is destabilizing to think about losing people you love and are part of your life. It's profound. And that was the hardest thing in writing this book, is to make sense of that. And it took me years, 2 years of grief. And things like just thinking about the life and death cycle, the idea in Japanese thinking of wabi sabi, that everything goes through this cycle, talking to indigenous scholars like Dr. Uriah Selidwin in the book about cycles of life. It's just inherent in our existence, right? Darwin, that evolution is about this cycle of life. So it took a lot for me to really grasp that, and it was transformative.
Yeah, I suppose facing everything. And what a very important thing my mother taught me is I remember a friend of mine, his dad died when we were still kids. So his dad was probably in his 40s at the time. And I remember going to see him, and my mum's, the one thing my mum said was, don't not mention it. Because you
Yeah.
say, when you lose someone, so many people, they don't mention it because they think, well, they won't want me to bring it to the surface. You know, they'll want to be alone with it. And, you know, perhaps if you don't know them that well, but I think you've got to face it some way when you can. You know, you've got to.
You know, and I mean, and it's been so striking talking about this book now for 6 weeks that the conversations around dying and grief have been one of the kind of centerpieces of the conversations. And we could learn in the West from other cultures, you know, as like in Bhutan, they have impermanence exercises that kids do in schools where they think about the full life of a grandparent and how they started as children and went through development, or now are old and will pass away, and they just embrace it, right? So it was a challenge for me, a struggle, and then ultimately something that taught me a lot to think about cycles of life.
So they talk to kids about the
Oh
inevitability
yeah,
when they're still.
yeah. They have practices and classroom exercises about this. So
Now you say that it's kind of weird that we don't. And
yeah,
people, I mentioned my dog earlier, and people say with pets, don't they? Pets are good because they teach kids that, you know, that there is a life cycle and that all lives come to an end, and because they live less time, you know, you get to see it while you're still young. But I mean, it shouldn't be too much of an intellectual leap for anyone of any age to know. I mean, we all know everyone dies at some
yeah,
point,
yeah.
but I guess we want to, like, you know, yeah, not, if we don't mention it, it won't be real, that kind of thing, which is infantilizing for the rest of us, really, isn't
It
it?
is. And I think it's a, you know, when I look at the United States and I look at our levels of anxiety, which are higher than other countries, you know, and I have an encounter with my younger daughter where she really had death anxiety, and I didn't know how to talk about it with her in a really direct, honest way. And a lot of, I'm thinking maybe part of Western anxiety is we don't think about the life cycle and talk about it directly and honestly.
Because you're trying to make everything perfect and
Yeah.
never ending.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I think it goes to, I mean, I suppose you could look at it, I mean, you could look at it in wider scales. It's like countries want to make themselves seem like permanent states, but if you look at history, everything
Yeah.
comes to an end. But, you know, you
Everything's,
can't, as a political leader, say, well, you know, we'll enjoy it while it lasts, but this will come crashing down at some point. No,
yeah.
I'm not quite having the honesty. You talked also about, because we, you know, I say the seeing amazing things might be the bit you'd go to, but we also talk about the grief. But what another bit that stood out, you talk about troops, and I do a bit of work with a military charity here in the UK, and it's about the problems people can face when they leave, and you put it in a way that would probably be helpful to them, because you put it in an awe concept. You said that civilian life leaves them hungering for awe. And I think I'm not military, but I know a lot of people that are. And I think they would probably maybe think about it in those terms. But
Yeah.
we think about, they've gone and seen horrible things. So we're all looking at suffering in terms of PTSD from seeing their friends blown apart, which sadly in
Yeah.
recent years has been a big thing. But it may be that more of the problem is not the grief, not the trauma of seeing the bad things, but it's no longer having the awe.
Yeah.
No longer having this life where they're seeing fantastic things, good and bad.
Yeah. And feeling their courage, right? You know, and using their courage for action. I mean, yeah, it was an honor to work with Stacy Bear, a veteran, who got thousands of veterans, tens of thousands of U.S. citizens, hundreds of thousands of U.S. citizens outdoors through the Sierra Club, and he gave them awe, you know, as you know, an amazing river rafting and rock climbing and the like. And he and I, in doing that work for a couple of years, I was around a lot of veterans, and I had this sense, like, and also talking with Stacy, that that's what they miss. They miss the wildness of where they've been, and the intensity. I remember, Richard, when I was doing that work, I think it was a tsunami in Indonesia, and I may get this wrong, the country, and apparently in the United States, hundreds of veterans showed up to veterans offices to try to go to Indonesia to help. They just want to be in intense, vast, powerful places to assist. And so and I think this is true of a lot of mental health. Yeah, young people who have a lot of courage, like, we should be thinking about not only medicating them, but finding directions of awe for them. And we did that with our veterans, and our study found, they went rafting for a day, 30% drop in PTSD symptoms for a week. So I hope this thinking about awe transforms our approach to some of the mental struggles that are really hard to move.
Yeah, because I think we all accept now that you need to eat well and do some exercise. Not just to live longer, although that's a very important reason to do it, but to be happy.
Yeah.
You need to push your body a little bit. You need to put the right fuel in. So we've kind of accepted that, but you're saying this is an extra thing that we should just accept as normal, right? And
I do. When you think about, once you think about awe, and like, okay, maybe I'll be healthier in my heart and my mind if I get a little bit of awe, a couple of minutes. We know it's not as hard to get as you might imagine, or find it. And then you think about how you can find it, of getting outdoors, gardening, looking at clouds, listening to some great music, getting into a museum. We just published a paper of kids in museums, reading ideas that really matter to you, thinking about, I love this exercise of, and I do this with the people I teach, like, think about a mentor who's inspired you morally, and then suddenly people think, oh my God, I'm thinking about Mrs. Byers in my writing class, and she taught me how to write a metaphor, and you're tearing up, so there are a lot of ways to find awe. I hope that it will become, much like gratitude or mindfulness, a pathway to health in our broader public.
I mean, it's the sort of thing, before reading the book, again, without maybe thinking about it too deeply, it's simple things like, when I take my daughter to school, there's a quick route you can go through traffic, or there's a nice long route you can go through the park.
Exactly.
And when I'm driving through the park, I'm not going this way because it's the quickest way. I'm going here because I want to see stuff. And you look, and there's deer, and parakeets and stuff. And it makes, it might take a couple of minutes more, but the difference it makes to the beginning of your day is huge.
It's huge. And it's these simple redesigns of how your route to work, your route to your kid's school. Do you take a moment and look at the sky? How are you listening to music, right? And are you listening, just sort of haphazardly, or are you listening to find music that brought you tears when you were younger, right? So I think there are a lot of simple activities to get us to more awe.
And you mentioned, I don't think you used the word hippie, but long hair, California psychology thing. At what point on that subject, it's possibly how people see it, at what point did psychedelics come into it for you?
Personally or research-wise?
Well, either, you can.
Yeah. Well, psychedelics came into my life when I was 17, and really changed, how my levels of anxiety, and, with LSD and the like. And then, empirically, we're starting to do work on it, and have, along with Peter Hendricks, made the case that one of the reasons he's synthesized and then organic plant medicines, with long traditions in many indigenous cultures, help us is through awe. They are self-dissolves. We feel like there are broader patterns in the world, in nature, and in culture, and in music, and social life that we're part of. broader systems, what I call them. And that's profound, to give people the opportunity to connect to these larger systems of meaning, and for me, so I think that is a very central hypothesis scientifically about why plant medicines, psychedelics work. And then it is also true of my own life, that they taught me I have community around me, that I'm part of nature, I'm not separate from it, that music has patterns of meaning that make my mind feel coherent. So I think awe will be a very central and dynamic idea for our advances in understanding psychedelics and plant medicines.
And what are they doing in the body that leads, as far as we can measure, what are they doing in the body that's leading you to these experiences of awe and better balance?
Well, what we know is that it deactivates the default mode network, which both awe and psychedelics like synthesized psilocybin, and in that deactivation, your self is just less. You hear it less. You're less self-critical, less self-focused, and then that opens you up to, ideas about kindness or loving humanity or feeling that nature has a consciousness, right? That it isn't just this human versus other divide. But we don't know the neurophysiology of those processes, the more oceanic processes, and all will point the way.
So we don't know exactly.
No.
Exactly what. Okay.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, that's made me think of something else you said, and I can't remember exactly what it was, about the self-critical.
Yeah.
What was that about the person who the constantly to the side of you that's criticizing and worrying?
Well, I called it the default self in the book,
The default
because
self. Okay, yeah.
it is. It's like, are you doing the right work? Are you on task? Are you getting your work goals satisfied? Are you rising in status? That's kind of, we have this self structure in our mind that keeps us trying to rise in society, because it's beneficial to us, right? And the people that are around us. But it can really undermine our well-being, as a lot of data show. And so, we need these ways to calm down the self-focus and shift our attention to things outside of the self, and all is one.
So the default self is useful because it's like the grown up there telling you should be doing
Yeah.
this, you should be doing that.
Yeah.
But
The ego.
yeah, but you have to find a way to stop listening to it.
Yeah.
And okay, so you have to, I don't know, overload the mind with great things so it doesn't have time to be bothering you the whole time.
Yeah. Well,
On
and
your
that's,
page.
and people know this intuitively, like, wow, when I go out and walk in nature, I feel different. When I walk through a city and observe all of its amazing activity, I feel different. When I shift my attention away from the self to a great piece of art, I feel different, or a meditation practice. And one of the pathways across those activities is feeling wonder and amazement and awe, that takes us out of ourself. And I love Jane Goodall's phrasing of being amazed at things outside of yourself.
Yes. And you talk about the importance of physical contact as well, which maybe again most people wouldn't think of as awe. And your sports basketball, you're saying pick up basketball. This is the kind of one-on-one. We don't have such a big basketball thing over here. But it made me think, because you're saying there's human contact in that because you're barging into each other, and whilst it might seem like a bit of rough and tumble, it's actually a bonding thing because there's human contact. And this charity that I mentioned before, a lot of that is using sport, and the main sport is Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. And I don't know if you know about that. And one of the things people don't like about it is you're wrestling. It's basically like wrestling, and you're kind of there's a lot of physical contact. It's not always that nice, people sweating on you. But it's also, I think, an important thing that we don't do as grown-ups so much. I mean, kids roll around and wrestle, but as a grown-up, it's not really an acceptable thing. You stop doing it when you're not a kid anymore. And we feel we need to grow up and be sensible. But you're saying we need this.
Yeah. I mean, Western European society is almost a joke, right? Compared to what many parts of the world in past times in human history, of like our amount of physicality, of wrestling and, dancing and ritualized forms like capoeira or, or judo or the like. So yeah, I think, again, it's interesting. There are many benefits to playing physical sports with other people, as we know, benefits you physically, but it's also, it's the emotions of, camaraderie, and suddenly you're in the flow in the game, and then you celebrate and you feel awestruck by some event in the game. And so we shouldn't lose sight of how these physical activities bring us social and emotional benefits. When I do yoga in a class, I don't know the strangers. We're all doing the same posture. We're synchronizing. Everybody does it in their unique way. And I have this feeling that comes over me so often of soft, quiet awe that we're all humans doing this ancient practice together and finding peace. And so one of the joys of writing the book was to profile how important sports are in our sense of deep meaning that awe brings us.
Is there data for the good that yoga does you?
Yeah, there's a lot. I think James Broad has a book.
Because I've talked to doctors about that before, and they're a bit like, so, well, it's probably good for you physically, and if people get benefit from it, that's good. But he talks about stuff that's specific to yoga?
Yeah, it's a review.
I'm interested in yoga because I do it myself, and I think the group aspect is very interesting, because I've noticed the British are quite reserved. So you go into the studio, and when it's really crowded, you can see people sort of going at the beginning and they're like, excuse me, and they're squeezing in. And like you have that feeling of, oh, I wish there weren't quite so many people here. But when you do the classes, the more people, the better.
Yeah, no.
Yeah, and you don't care if you've been elbowed by someone or something.
Yeah.
Because you kind of feed off each other's energy.
And, part of the lesson in the book, we're such an isolated, pandemic, lockdown, looking at our cell phones, so much individualism. And the book is saying this collective effervescence, or being together, moving together, singing, yoga, sports, prayer, right? Praying. A minister told me it's so different when we pray together, when we meditate together. So, and I think that part of the mystery of the power of being together is just thinking about awe, and that it brings us together in this transcendent way.
Fantastic. That's a great way to end. Thank you so much for your time, and best of luck with the book, and I'll do what I can to share it with as many people as possible.
Thank you. I really appreciate it.
Professor Dacher Keltner, thank you very much.
Okay. Bye, Richard.
Cheers. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.